This is Agnes Martin. You sound like he's suddenly appeared. Actually, he's been there for a while. So I'm looking now. I mean, I've defined minimalism as basically something that happens in 3D art, but which is almost like a response to a certain dead end that happened in painting, when it became so formally purified that there was nothing to see, and then you start to think of the painting as an object, or you become aware of the space around it, and that becomes an interest in its own right. But there are some painters doing things which could be seen as a little bit similar, so I just will quickly run through a few of those without saying too much about them. Agnes Martin, she had a big retrospective at the Tate Gallery just a couple of years back, so she's sort of around in people's minds more recently. It's a little bit like following on from the simple monochrome paintings of Reinhardt. I think that's someone that she had a particular dialogue with. Reduced, simple, bare surface, but with a geometric grid added onto it. The grid is so detailed here that, we start to be not interested in each individual form as a form. It's just the overall feel of the surface. The grid is so monotonous that we don't read it in a formalistic kind of way. So it's always a handmade mark, hand-drawn mark. It's a conjuncture between drawing and painting, you could say. She's painted a white surface and then she's drawn lines on it. So her whole mature production, once she finds her sort of signature idiom, is of linear marks or sometimes painted marks, modulating to some degree a very simple surface, basically almost monochrome. She ended up working in New Mexico, almost in isolation down there. There's so many things we could go into in a course like this because there are so many artists around, but so I don't really have time to look at her development. But this very reductive quality. It means that because you're aware of the phenomenology of your perception over your awareness of the process of perception, the artwork and your engagement with it can be a very sort of meditative feeling. And I think even for her in the making of it, she would think of it as a very meditative activity. She's another of these artists I had exchanged letters with. So she said, so you talk a lot about, Chinese Buddhist philosophy and Taoism. She says, my greatest spiritual inspiration comes from the Chinese spiritual teachers, especially Lao Tzu. The sixth patriarch Huineng, that's a Zen Buddhist patriarch. I have read and been inspired by the sutras of the other Chinese Buddhist masters, and Chuang-Tzu, the disciple of Lao Tzu, who was very wise and very amusing. Kind of similar in a way. That was Agnes Martin's Leaf of 1965. This is Robert Ryman's Untitled in 1965. Again, it's a very simple white surface with, but the linear marks. But the linear marks are made by the way the paint has been applied. So there are lots of artists who painted monochromes, but they end up, even just to paint a white monochrome or a black monochrome, you could have a whole exhibition of white monochromes and they'd all look completely different one from the other, or the black monochromes would look completely different one from another. Bryce Marden, Red, Yellow, Blue number 2, 1974. The reason I'm showing you him is to show you one artist who worked in a very minimal way and then found the way beyond it. He ended up bringing back painted marks in this sort of calligraphic way. Again, it's another artist, to me, still needing to dialogue with Jackson Pollock and his linear webs. But the other thing he's dialoguing with is Chinese and Japanese calligraphy. So it's like a sort of couplet, calligraphic couplet, the structure of it, as the title also says, diagram couplet 1. This is, also the same kind of influences coming into play. Again, it's Jackson Pollock, like this sort of web of linear forms, but it's also this dialogue with Chinese brushwork, calligraphy and painting. Cold Mountain, 6 Bridge. It's its relationship to Chinese poetry or something, the title. Han Shan. Well, that's minimalism and painting very briefly. And then this is what you might call post-minimalism. I'm wanting to do with each of the tendency I introduce, I want to bring it up to the present day, towards the present day anyway, to look at how that trend continues. Minimalism is, it was almost entirely an American phenomenon, unlike many of the other phenomena we're going to look at, like installation art and so forth, but conceptual art. But yeah, there is some afterlife to minimalism. Hans Haacke, artist from a German background but American-based artist. Isolation Box Grenada, 1984. So yeah, what he's doing is producing almost like a kind of replica of a kind of box that the American troops used to put isolate prisoners in when they invaded Grenada around that time. A Caribbean island, and it had a socialist or communist government, and it was too close to America for them to kind of accept this, and they invaded it and changed the government. And this is trying to remind us of some of what happened in that incident. So it's political art, but I think he's playing around with the fact that it looks like minimal art. It's sort of, so maybe isn't he sort of saying maybe that minimal art, it's trying to say how it's avoiding dealing with the complex realities outside the white cube. There's some element of critique here about minimalism by using a minimal form to deal with. It's like this was the Guantanamo Bay of that day. It's not as big a deal as Guantanamo Bay, but it's some kind of issue like that. Turrell, he's not so much trying to subvert minimalism, but he's a sort of neo-minimalist in a way. I mean, he's sort of almost like what minimalism is if it's alive today, Skyscape 1 of 1975. So his early works are really quite a lot later. He installs usually a whole space, so it creates a sort of purpose-built architectural format that his work is a part of. you're kind of looking up at a ceiling, say, and you see light coming in. It's a little bit like looking at a painting, a monochrome painting or something. Very subtle light effects. Usually it's a mixing in his works of artificial light and real light. So here you're looking at a frame view of the sky. It's just the same sky you could see if you're outside the building by yourself, you know. But somehow art enables you to see the sky differently. Roden Crater, she's been working on since 1977, and I believe it's not really properly open to the public yet, but I think pretty soon it will be. Some people have gained access to it. It's an enormous project inside this big crater, trying to create a kind of environmental art piece, you know, an outdoor sequence of art installations. There's a sort of tunnel that you can take to get inside the crater. So he's made artworks, but the whole natural environment becomes part of it's again for looking at the sky. You could say it's a sort of natural observatory, something like that. So a work in progress over a very long period of time. Razor, 1991. Again, you're sort of looking at. It could involve artificial light. It could involve natural lighting combination, but turned almost into like an abstract painting that you're looking at. They're very meditative experiences, James Turrell's works. And you know, it's a whole environment that you're in. That kind of meditative quality is much more in the foreground than it would be in the work of Andre or Judd or Sarah. It's a little bit linked with Flavin because light is the key element, but Flavin doesn't usually have that kind of meditative feel to it. So it's almost like a slightly new age phenomenon, you could say, James Turrell's that. Rashid Araeen, Zero to Infinity. First done in 1968, then redone in 2007. He's an artist born in Pakistan, but he's moved to London, well, first briefly to Paris and then to London. He was already, established in his practice when he was, as a modernist artist, when he was in Pakistan, but producing mostly paintings, I think. It's only after he moved to London he started to make works like this, and he made them quite independently of the minimalist artists. You know, minimalism wasn't really a phenomenon in Britain at that time. There was a gallery in London called Listen Gallery where they showed the work of minimalists a little bit later on, I think. But his contribution was really not recognized. It's again a kind of ethnic discrimination because he's from a Pakistani background. He's a member of an ethnic minority, and somehow his art was not taken seriously. He himself actually curated a very important show that was one of the first shows that put the work of British artists from minority backgrounds into the Hayward Gallery, and really helped start the dialogue about multiculturalism in British art. He also set up a very important magazine called Third Text, which played a big role, still going today, in cross-cultural study of art, art outside of white Western culture. his background and the way he earned his living originally was as an engineer, so he's very interested in these kind of very simple primary structures. It's a little bit like the work visually, although it developed independently of that. It's a little bit like the work of Sol LeWitt, who's an artist I could have included here under the story of minimalism, but actually I'm going to include him somewhere else in the story instead. But he wasn't aware of Sol LeWitt's work until, after he'd started doing this work, and then his girlfriend, later to be his wife, said to him, "Hey, have you seen this work by someone called Sol LeWitt?" So as you move around, then the configuration seems of the linear form seems to change. You could, if you wanted to, relate it back to pattern making in Islamic art, where there's a lovely sense of using repeated geometrical forms to decorate space and so forth. Maybe there's some influence there that he's imbibed, maybe unconsciously, because he wasn't at that time, I think, very directly interested in such art. It's got two dates, 1968 and 2007, because it was remade, more recently at the time when his art was taken seriously. So if you go to the Tate Gallery today, you'll see one of his works like this on display, because now we're in a moment where there is finally this kind of multicultural understanding. So just as female artists also were tended to be neglected, so in the new Tate display, in the new wing, you'll see work of female artists who wouldn't have been on display so prominently, a generation ago at least. Anish Kapoor. I think his show in Hong Kong is still on, maybe. He's in the top floor of the Pedder building in the Gagosian Gallery of his recent work. It's particularly important with this kind of art to see the originals, because it's really hard to understand from reproduction. Everything we've been looking at today would be much more interesting if you're actually there physically involved, because it is about your body. So if you're looking, it's like what Carl Andre said, as I read it out last week. He says, photography is like pornography of sculpture. It's not the real thing. This is kind of work that Anish Kapoor produced when he first set out, the first kind of art he became famous for. These very simple reductive forms, minimal forms, then coloured with coloured powder, so the surface sort of becomes a bit unreal, hard to define. And people have related that back to his Indian side of his ancestry. The way people during the festival of Holi, they throw around coloured powders and things like that. Or almost like some kind of shrine-like object. It has a sense of something a little bit sacred about it, and that's often the case in some of his later works. Again, it's a little bit like James Turrell, that kind of this slightly kind of uncanny feel about it. One of his most famous public pieces in Chicago, massive sculpture, the Cloud Gate, you can get underneath it, so these kind of principles of engaging with a sculpture from different directions and using mirrored surfaces. This all comes from what the minimalists had explored earlier, although this is it's taking it outside the gallery. And like John McCracken's work, the surface is very pure. It doesn't. It's a feeling as if it wasn't made by human hands. It's almost like a miraculous object that's just arrived there inexplicably. Cloud Gate. It's almost like it's some portal to another reality or something like that. Maya Lin, I'm still talking about artists from different ethnic or cultural backgrounds engaging with minimalism in one way or another. Kapoor has Indian background on one side of his family, he has a Jewish background on the other side. British-based artist. Maya Lin, she's American but with an Asian background, and she won the competition for the Vietnam Memorial in Washington DC, a major national competition or fantastic opportunity. And the way in which it was judged was anonymously, so they didn't know they were giving it to a young Asian girl. You know, they might not have done so if it was being judged in some other way. So she had this immense opportunity at the beginning of her career. It's not a pure sculpture, of course, but because it has this monumental function, it's just a big, long stone wall with names of every American who was killed, not the Vietnamese, only the Americans that in the Vietnam War. But it's hard to imagine something like this without minimalism. You know, this just this simple, large form. It's as much architecture as sculpture, but how could it come into being if there wasn't minimalism? I don't think it would have happened. It was very controversial because a lot of people said, no, we want figurative sculpture, and indeed there is some figurative memorial that was later made nearby, I suppose, to placate those people. But you know, maybe this is a war that was deeply unpopular, and many people think it, you know, should never have happened and all that, even in America. So this very subdued language may be appropriate. You know, it's not a celebration of victory, let's put it that way. It wasn't a victory. So what kind of language can you use in such a situation where you're memorializing a defeat that many of you feel shouldn't have been a war in the first place? So maybe a very minimal language is the best way of dealing with that. There's a kind of muteness or reticence about something that is hard to discuss clearly. But I think, you know, despite the being unpopular in some quarters, I think it has been a success, and family members come there to leave flowers, or they take rubbings of their loved one's name off the wall, that kind of thing. Rachel Whiteread, Untitled 25 Spaces, 1995, younger British female artist. It's like the very minimal forms that you get in minimal art. Actually, each is a kind of a cast of forms underneath actual objects. So it's like a kind of making solid or clarifying the negative spaces, turning negative spaces into positive spaces. And her most famous work is this, House, 1993 to 94, where she used the same strategy, but it's the negative space of a whole house, a house that was about to be demolished. Or I think most of the houses around had already been demolished, and she got the rights to take a sort of cast from the inside of this house. And then the house was knocked down, just leaving the cast. So it's like a sort of ghost of the house that was there till recently. It has that, because it's an actual cast of the negative spaces, the interior of the house, That gives a certain authenticity in the same way a photograph has, that kind of indexical relationship to the thing itself. It wouldn't be the same as if she just made it afterwards, a copy of what the house used to look like or something like that. This actually was made in physical contact with the actual space itself. It's almost like the practice of making a death mask, where you make a portrait of someone by taking a cast of their face after their death. There's death masks or life masks too. They have a special kind of quality of relatedness to their subject. So this is a bit like that. Felix Gonzales-Torres, Untitled, Ross, 1991. So again, it's this sort of post-minimalist sort of playing with the language of minimalism. We saw how Robert Morris, for instance, liked to use create corner pieces. So Gonzales-Torres has done that more than once, using the idea of engaging with the corner of a space. He's a gay artist who wants to make art that kind of deals with his own experience amongst other topics. He talks about other things as well, of course. So often, there are several works where he is using little sweet packets and just making a pile of them. The one they have in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, you're allowed to come into the gallery and take the sweets away. They will replace them over time. And the total quantity of sweets, it's a memorial to his lover who died of AIDS. Ross is actually an artist himself called Ross Bleckner, a painter. And the weight of the sweets is the weight of his body and things like that. So there's a kind of at one level it looks a little bit like minimalism, but actually the content and the range of references are really very different. Introducing something so personal into the work, which is very different from the impersonal quality of minimalism. So it's engaging with it, but also a kind of subversion of it, because if for someone like Gonzales-Torres who's interested in identity politics, gay identity politics, the language of minimalism is a bit too reductive to be able to help with that. Even someone like Damien Hirst, I think his vitrines, in a way, it relates a little bit to the simple structure of minimalist art. They're often repeating a single form, but of course he's using the vitrines to display a dead animal, an actual body chopped up into segments in this case. So there's something minimalist, but there's also something kind of very unminimalist about it. So I think Gonzales-Torres and Hirst both have that quality about them. This is some comfort gained from the acceptance of the inherent lies in everything. Well, that's typical kind of Damien Hirst title. Janine Antony, Chocolate Noir, 1992. So it's both she created this sort of minimalist block form, but then it's also a kind of performance where she herself is sort of gnawing into the chocolate. It's kind of playing with female stereotypes that women love sweet things and all this sort of thing. And so she sort of kind of attacks the form directly herself. It's a 600-pound block of chocolate. And anyway, as she kind of gnaws into it, she reveals other chocolates are inside. So it's like some of the work she does is sort of playing with female stereotypes, not to attack them, but to exacerbate them to an extreme where they just fall apart of their own internal logic, she had another one called Lardnor, where she had a block where fat, and inside there were 300 sticks of lipsticks. Ashley Bickerton. Tormented Self-Portrait, Susie et al., 1988. Also, I want to see it as a kind of parody of minimalism or something like that. It's a very simple form. A lot of the works he did at that time have these very simple forms, but then he's put all these different logos on. It's almost like they're the sponsors of his artwork or something like that. What it would be like a racing car or something has all these decals on of the sponsoring companies in a race or something like that. So it's like minimalism meets pop. You could say the pop and its concern with popular consumer culture and brand names, and the purity of form of minimalism put together. Tormented Self-Portrait, Susie et al. Because Arles, of course, is where the city in southern France, in Provence, associated with Van Gogh. He went there when he went south. So, and he made tormented self-portraits. So, but this is clearly not a tormented self-portrait. So there's a lot of irony involved, right? So, what is there of a self-portrait? It says self-portrait. Yet we have this sort of the impersonality of minimalist art, which is not an expressive kind of art. Doesn't tell you much about the artist's personal biography. Maybe the biography or the self-portrait is all these brands. Maybe this is who he is. I am what I consume. These are the brands I use. Therefore, this is what my identity is. If you want to know who I am, just like some person, you can imagine some person who's very consumerist and that, and you're invited to their home, and they say, "Oh, here's my so and so, and here's my so and so, and here's my," and showing off the different brands of the things they own, and that's somehow who they are. Again, it's modern experience. We buy brands. Before, people bought stuff, carrots or whatever. Now you buy whatever brands that you do buy. Things are mediated by large companies. There was a time when the Museum of Modern Art in New York, they had a project where they invited artists to talk about other artists' works. And I happened to be there to see Ashley Bickerton talking about Donald Judd's work. Actually, let me find the work that was. It was this one. Yeah, he was talking about this one. So he's definitely interested in minimalism, but he had some questions about it. He talked about it would be interesting if you could take this sculpture and take it out of the gallery and maybe sort of abandon it in a jungle or something like that, put it in a very different environment and see how it would look there. I think about all this emphasis on commodities and brand names and that, it's almost like a critique of minimalism to say that it has this kind of shiny, hard-edge look of some modern design. What's the appeal of an Apple iPhone and all that? It's all about this lovely, smooth, kind of perfect form and all this sort of thing. We are susceptible to those kind of aesthetics, and minimalism maybe is engaging with all that. And an artist like Ashley Bickerton is sort of reconstructing slightly some of that. He himself now lives in Bali, actually, so he's part of a kind of globalized story of art, and he's also interested in non-Western art, in Asian art himself. Okay, so that's enough for today. So like I say, I'd like to meet on Friday, and we'll start looking at environmental art and installation art, which I'm treating that as one story. It's a sort of continuation of the story today, the story of minimal art as art that's concerned with its environment, that moment of the loss of purity of self-contained formal objects. And another part of that story is people looking out of the gallery space at other kinds of environments for art, or installation art, looking at installing art in spaces that are not just pure white cubes necessarily. It's all part of one moment of kind of a kind of breakdown of purity in art. So I think we'll make a start at looking at that on Friday. So I have the pleasure of your company more than once this week.